All right, today we're going to talk about how to breach a network and using only vulnerabilities that we see most people risk accept, or perhaps they do not even consider them to be vulnerabilities. So yeah, let's jump into this. All right, basic agenda overview. I'll give a super brief overview of our company, so you'll just have a sense of where this is coming from. And then I'll give a high-level overview of today's demo, followed by drilling into each of the 12 steps of our attack. At each step, I'll share what you should do to stop it and give time for questions and discussion. First, like I learned at USAA, it's always good to have your mission and core values and all of that kind of good stuff on every slide deck. So our purpose is to help our clients find their vulnerabilities before the attacker does. And our vision is to be the absolute best at what we do and, not be about huge profits and stuff. Our mission is superior quality testing and providing an actionable plan to our clients. And we do have some very unique core values for this industry, but I'll let you go back and take a look if you want to know more about those. This is more of a marketing slide. So my company, Penn Consultants, we offer a full range of offensive security testing services. So, pen testing, red teaming, and so on. We even disclose what you can expect in terms of the number of actionable findings, for example. So we're very transparent. But yeah, this is all boring marketing stuff. So we'll just move on. I've had a lot of cool jobs over the years, from system and network administrator for a church and then a school district while in college, to working at Lockheed Martin on the Cybers project. And then the core of my career was at NSA as a nation state hacker. Then I went to USAA, where I created and led their red team. But for the last 5 years, I've been exclusively here at Penn Consultants. We currently have 6 people on the team, and we are actively interviewing to fill 2 slots at this time. So, within the next week or so, maybe a couple of weeks, we'll have be a team of 8. All right, what we're all here for. The goal for today is to show how common vulnerabilities can be strung together to compromise a network. Basically what we do on every pen test. But also I'm going to show you how to prevent this. We're going to go from knowing absolutely nothing to full compromise. And there are 12 steps we're going to show. At each step, I'll demonstrate vulnerabilities present in most all of your networks, like right now, today. And then again, going to show you how to prevent that. Again, I just said everyone listening to me right now is likely vulnerable to most, if not all of this. And it's nothing sophisticated. And to prove it, I'm going to show real world examples throughout this presentation from well-known companies. Issues present right now, redacted enough, of course, that you don't know who they are, as you'll see here in a little bit. All right, so again, to start with, we know nothing but the target's main website. So first, we're going to look at document metadata. We'll start by collecting documents on the main website of our target. These documents often contain metadata, which contains, among other things, like geolocation information that can be useful for targeting your physical presence or people or company activity. These are just 2 examples, one taken from an image on a website of one of the largest investment firms in the world. And the second example here is an image taken from the website of one of the largest, I think one of the largest lending firms in the US. All right, this same metadata can also contain information about hardware and software being used in your environment. These are 2 examples from those same 2 companies. And assuming these are kind of recent timestamps and, assuming it's showing that there's a vulnerable version of something running, like Adobe or Microsoft Office, which many do, by the way. But we can direct employees to download a specially crafted document, for example, in an attempt to exploit endpoint software and gain a foothold in the environment. I'm not going to go down that path today because there's only like a 1% success or 1% chance of success with that. But do keep your software patched to protect against that attack path. Metadata can also contain internal usernames. Notice we have some of the internal usernames from those same two organizations. On the left, we see its first initial last name format. On the right, they've done a little bit better job to avoid their usernames from being so predictable, but they appear to be sequential. So, it still could be better because sequential is still fairly easy to guess. And in just a minute, we'll see why knowing your usernames is dangerous. But first, before we do that, for blue team and defenders, this is what you need to do or make a note of so far. Do these things to stop this unfolding attack. You haven't seen the full attack yet, but here in a few minutes, you're going to want to think back all the way back to here because security is in layers, right? And this is the first layer to address. So a few things you can do: disable metadata from documents, example through a group policy. Scrub metadata from documents, especially documents that are going to be publicly available. Update all vulnerabilities, not just external facing ones. And of course, external facing vulnerabilities, generally have a greater risk. That is definitely true. But again, internal vulnerabilities can lead to remote code execution as well. All right, next we need to determine the username format. So having a list of usernames from the document metadata allows us to determine the domain name user convention. And we find that usernames are often the same as the first part of the email address, which is a terrible practice, by the way, or otherwise something that's easily derived from knowing the person's name or people's name. And so why is this important? The answer is, it's the only piece of information we need to perform a number of attacks against a subset of potential users. So these attacks include, but are not limited to, but they include, password attacks such as password spring or brute force, or phishing, or if there's a lockout policy, denial of service. And we're going to drill into each of these more here in a few minutes, and I'll show how we can. For example, I'll show how we can lock out nearly all of your accounts, for example. And we will see, I guess, how to expand our small list of possible usernames that we're collecting and expand that into a nearly complete, if not complete, and accurate list of your users. But before we do that, to mitigate what we've seen, again, in the last few slides, just stop right here and do another round of mitigation. You need to use a username convention that is not based on the person's name or email address, for that matter, and one that is not sequential either. So something not easily predictable is what you're shooting for. So perhaps an employee number, employee ID number, or maybe a predictable prefix with like 4 random numbers or something like that. So again, not predictable. All right, next we need to create a candidate username list. First, we find a list of employee names, either from LinkedIn, or some industries, such as law firms, have online directories open up to the public. And most of the time, a wildcard can be used, such as seen here with one of the largest law firms in the US. And just I guess, a side note, law firms are among the easiest to hack. Our law firm clients get a lot of value out of our testing. We'll say it that way. Or a third option where we collect names is maybe we could just download a list of, let's say, the top 10,000 most common names. So from this information, we generate a list of 1,000, tens of thousands of possible usernames. So a large percentage will not be valid. We know that, but we don't know yet which are valid and invalid. As far as what you can do, this is an attacker technique, so there's not a lot you can do, practically speaking, in most cases. But as the company, you could either remove your online directories or try to secure them. or at least minimize what is shown for each user profile. And for your users, they could make their profile, their social media profiles private, excuse me, which in most cases prevents their name from showing up directly associated with your company, right? And two things that are likely going are these things are two things that are likely going to be tough for you. But I mean, it is possible to do something. All right, next we look for a user enumeration vulnerability because we need to validate our candidate username list. What is a user enumeration vulnerability? Well, that allows us to enumerate or at least verify that a user account is valid or not. So the first step is to get a list of fully qualified domains, domain names, FQDNs. From the target domain. And there's a lot of ways we can collect this information, including brute forcing your DNS. But many people register their FQDN with its own SSL certificate, which is a bad practice. It's a bad practice because all registrations are publicly recorded in a certificate transparency record database. As an example, check out this interesting stuff that the US House has registered at the bottom right. We've got Outlook, external Outlook, we've got network backup server, we've got an admin console and so on. So by simply searching CT records, which again are public records, we can often collect the bulk of your FQDNs without even touching your site. We can also script against the CT database as shown in this command. And these are partial examples from 4 large US organizations. So the goal here is we want to find a service that authenticates against the corporate identity management solution, often Active Directory, for example. And based on what we see here, there's plenty of potential, right? There's VPN, there's remote, there's access, there's Citrix, and so on. On the bottom right, you actually see an example of what a Citrix remote access portal looks like. And again, we found all of this just from public SSL certificate records. Next, we feed in our huge list of possible usernames. So we exploit the difference in response between a valid and invalid account to prune our list of candidates, such as a difference in timing, as you see here. So, an invalid account looks like it's taking about 160, 170 milliseconds, whereas a valid account is taking about 120 milliseconds longer. So, when the username is not found, the IAM solution usually just returns. But when the username is found, the IAM solution computes the hash for the given password and then compares that hash against its database. And of course, this takes time, thus the longer response time. And this, by the way, is very common to find this. We find it with almost all logins. Or perhaps the login screen redirects to a different location. So if you're using like Microsoft O365 Azure services, then your external services are nearly guaranteed to be vulnerable to this attack because Microsoft has risk accepted this attack on your behalf. Or better yet, Google services, for example, just straight up tells you whether the account's valid or not. So at this point, our username list contains only valid usernames. Depending on the nature of the user enumeration vulnerability, or depending on the recon information we were able to collect, we may have a near complete list of your users, or at least real close to it. With that, we can lock out all of your accounts from external, and your business grinds to a halt. And that's because of another misguided policy, locking out your accounts due to failed logins. But we'll talk more about this later. We also have the information needed for many types of password attacks, which again, we're going to talk about here in just a few minutes. So here's what you need to do so far with this one is wildcard domains to some degree in your SSL certificates, perhaps like a 3-tiered schema, just as an example, because you want to balance the need to protect your full domain from compromise because of a top-level wildcard with the need to list the full domain name in the cert. Again, you don't want to do that. We've seen the danger in there because they'll show up in public logs. Do not risk accept user enumeration vulnerabilities. So ensure the response between a valid and invalid account are precisely the same. In the case of response timing, you could potentially hold the response until 1 full second has passed since the request, or otherwise randomize the response delay. But the key is you should not be able to easily detect a difference or otherwise distinguish between a valid and invalid account. All right, the next weakness in the chain is predicting users' passwords. So we're going to exploit a misguided policy that way too many people still have. Many companies force their users to change their passwords arbitrarily for no reason, such as every 90 days. And this has no meaningful protection against a breached password because breached passwords are used in a few days, if not minutes. And if your average time to rotate is 45 days, then a compromised password will have, long been used by that point, right? And this is why all reputable standards advise against this practice. Again, the reason is when users or I should say, when users are forced to change their password periodically, not only is it not helping, but it actually leads to a very predictable password. In fact, we have an internal script that generates a short list of passwords for us that reliably compromises about 25% of your users' passwords. So a 90-day rotation policy is basically worse than useless. It's going to be your downfall. How to protect against predictable passwords. So do not force your users to change their passwords. And here's some recent examples from our testing on the right. Of basically how many accounts we've compromised and how based on predictable passwords and how that percentage has a direct correlation to the number of days set for the password rotation or expiration. And so the evidence couldn't be more clear. You're seeing it right here. However, if the password has been compromised, I just need to say this, if the password has been compromised, it must be changed immediately though. So use an identity management solution that restricts short, weak passwords. And that also prevents, hopefully a solution that also prevents brute forcing without locking out the account, such as an exponentially rate limiting or, anomaly detection or things of this nature, right? And it has it built into the solution. Also audit passwords at least quarterly. So dump the hashes, try to crack them. If they crack easily, they're too weak, right? All right, now that we have a list of known valid usernames and a list of likely passwords, we spray those against an external service, likely the same service we used for the user validation. So what is a password spray? A password spray basically is we take one of those easy to predict passwords, such as spring 2024 exclamation mark, and we try that password across all accounts. And then we repeat that process. So even going slow enough to avoid lockouts and detection, it's not uncommon for us to get through at least 200 passwords per day. So in just a couple of days or a few days, we get through 1,000 passwords. And historically, we compromise about 25% of your accounts, as you saw earlier. And this attack is often completely missed. This is possible because of everything we've talked about up until now. So do everything we've mentioned so far, but also create alerts for this type of activity. And then up next, we'll talk about how MFA could have prevented this, but it never does. All right, so I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen MFA configured securely. And I've tested hundreds, perhaps even 1,000 implementations at this point, and literally only 3 were secure. And we're going to talk about misconfigurations first, and then after that, we're going to talk about how we bypass MFA as well. But there's a serious problem in our industry with MFA, and I'm not talking about SMS either. So please, if you pay attention to nothing else, pay attention here. So MFA could have protected against the user enumeration, the password spray, the denial of service, and more, if it were configured securely. But it fails to kick in until after the password is checked. And you've already seen how dangerous this is, right? Over the last few minutes. So back in the day, the login screen had a username box, it had a password box, and it had a box for your RSA token. And if any of those were wrong, you got a failed login, and you didn't know which one it was. But usability drove us to where it is now, where we're able to verify a password before MFA ever kicks in. So, secure your MFA, right? And then have us test it for you. And we'd love to add you to the list of the 3 secure examples that we know of. One of them being shown here as an example. And here's a high level overview of how you can do this. And it absolutely can be done. We've got feedback before. Oh, that can't be. It can be done, right? So do the right thing. Don't settle for insecurely configured MFA, right? All right, just as I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen MFA configured securely, I probably wouldn't need more than maybe 2 hands to count the number of times we could not bypass MFA, and it's not hard. So at this point, we've compromised 25% of your users' passwords, let's say. So a common misconception is even though we have the password, that we can't get past MFA. And that's what we like to call mistaken. It's easy to bypass MFA in a number of ways. For example, bypass number 1, a new account without MFA that prompts for setup after login, and we just set it up on our phone, right? Or bypass number 2, partial adoption rate. So, Fred over in accounting has been employed for 32 years, but has never logged in remotely, so he's never set up his MFA. But no worries, we'll do that on our phone as well as soon as we log in. All right, bypass number 3, we send an MFA push. And I have to be real transparent here. Attackers love push MFA. It's far less secure than even SMS-based MFA, which, as I'm sure you've heard, is not necessarily that great. And 20% of your users will accept the push just out of habit or muscle memory. So basically, if we have more than about 5 or 6 compromised accounts from our password spray, that MFA, but by the way, MFA didn't actually even prevent that, right? The password spray could have been prevented by MFA, it didn't, right? But if we have 5 or 6 accounts compromised, there's like a 100% chance of us getting in. Bypass 4, a related approach. We send dozens of push requests to a user until they get just so annoyed that they accept it. And this is a growing trend that we see among attackers as well. So I can't overemphasize enough how terrible push MFA is, push notification MFA is. Other bypass methods include finding a service without MFA. I would say maybe 75% of the time, someone who's using, let's say, Mimecast, we can log in directly to Mimecast without MFA. Likewise, many other cloud services. For example, what used to be called Azure AD or what we called AAD. We get access to all of your AD objects from external with no MFA. Or sometimes we can brute force the MFA OTP or one-time password. I won't go through the rest of these due to time, but we almost always get past MFA. Here's a ranking of the best MFA solutions, at least in our opinion and experience. And I bash on Microsoft a lot, as should all of you, but they do have one of the better push MFA solutions. It requires some basic math and number matching, so it gets the user to think, which seems to be a decent balance of usability and security because it's mitigating much of that muscle memory response that we see with the other solutions. It makes it much harder for us to exploit as attackers, right, compared to basic push MFA. Other recommendations: prevent brute force of the OTP. Let's see, require additional information for MFA sign up. So like send a message after MFA sign up, which, this may help detect a malicious MFA takeover. And there have been some examples of that in the news. All right, remote access. Now that we have access to multiple accounts, we gain remote access to a workstation as a standard user, for example. Then again, we may pop an IT admin with a weak password, which makes for a really awkward debrief call later, by the way, and we've had several of those. Not a lot of easy things you can do once the attacker gets to this point, but there are a few things. So anomaly detection. So like weird login behavior in terms of the time of day or from different countries within like a few minutes of one another. And something we've seen with our more mature clients is MFA prompts for all authentication attempts, even once you get internal on the workstation. All right, escalating privileges. Regardless of the privileges of the accounts we compromise, we privilege escalate to other users' data and accounts, to local admin on the box that we're on, or a privileged domain account, or maybe even domain admin. Examples of how we do that: keyloggers, right? Is one example, or credentials in files on disk or open network shares. And we find this like every time. Or we man in the middle certain protocols. So LLMNR or IPv6, those are very common. Basically, workstations are usually requesting those, but if you don't have anything listening, we just respond and take it over. So lots of other ways. We always seem to find a way to escalate privileges. I hesitated even creating this slide because there's just too much. The recommendation is to secure your internal network and get an internal pen test to verify it, of course. I listed some of the things we talked about, but there are, literally 1,000 ways, more than 1,000 ways. All right, getting close now. So let's mass collect all of your data and get it ready for exfil. A common way we gain access to much of your data is we just crawl all of your open network shares. And there's always a lot of those. And we always find just all kinds of useful data, and rarely does this get detected either. In addition to containing a ton of like PII, these shares, especially shares with startup scripts and stuff like that, often contain service account passwords. And these allow us to compromise additional systems and more data, often known as pillaging. Once we collect all of your data, we stage it for exfil, meaning we pull it all together, probably compress it, perhaps obfuscate it. And of course, for our testing, we typically swap out the real data here with synthetic or fake data because we want to avoid an actual breach, of course. So again, do all of the things mentioned so far, plus look for large anomalous data transfers from, let's say, your network shares or to the disk. And EDR type solutions have a decent chance of catching this, especially the tooling and the behavior associated with this, assuming the attacker's beachhead is a managed device, of course. And endpoint DLP can sometimes detect the presence of certain data that is out of place, assuming the data is not obfuscated real time. Yeah, those are some of the ways. All right, final step. We export all of the data collected out of the network. And we're going to talk about some DLP bypass tricks as well. And in the rare event DLP is even an issue. All right, there's many ways we do this. HTTP is often the easiest because it blends right in with web traffic, and DLP solutions rarely detect the exfil, especially if it's over HTTPS. Worst case scenario, we zip up the payload and we change the first couple of bytes, the magic bytes, because this is what DLP looks at, those bytes to determine what the file type is. But regardless, decompression will fail if we change those, so data cannot be analyzed. And again, this fools nearly every pricey DLP solution there on the market. Also look for huge outbound data transfers because these are rarely noticed as well in our experience. And even if it were, by that point, the data is long gone anyway, but, at least you have a chance to start incident response if you see it. So what can you do? Be sure to investigate large outbound data transfers and also tune your tune your DLP solutions, right? So like a WAF or web application firewall, DLP is not that great without spending some time configuring it for your unique environment. So yeah, do that. And then limit exceptions in security layers. So consult a compliance officer and a lawyer and see what you can do there. Wrapping it up. All right, this attack scenario that we just went through, it strung together multiple vulnerabilities that are often risk accepted or perhaps not even considered vulnerabilities. Yet we saw how combining these can breach a network. However, it doesn't even include the other common ways that we breach networks. So I guess the bottom line is get a network pen test from a reputable firm. And we have a page here that will help you with what to look for. So like, avoid automated black box, time box type pen test, for example. So, definitely just be on the lookout for a good reputable firm. If you're not getting a few dozen actionable findings from your pen test, you either have gone with the wrong vendor or you've maybe restricted your current vendor too much. All right, finally, just want to say, huge thank you to Vic and Frank for helping get this set up, and whoever else helped on the back end that maybe I'm not even aware of. Just appreciate the invite and getting this organized. And of course, thank all of you for attending.